Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Kiln Restaking Rendez-Vous. Today we have Ellie, systems engineer at Espresso, and I'm joined by Ben Rodriguez, my counterpart at Coinbase. Guys, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Yeah, how are you?
I'm doing awesome. Yeah, thank you for having me back. It's going to be a very fun conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited for this one. So, Ellie, could you start off by introducing yourself? How did you end up working in blockchain in general, and then Espresso?
So I found out about blockchain while I was in college. I ended up taking an intro to blockchain class, just kind of on a whim, and I ended up really, really enjoying it. So from that on, I knew I wanted to work in blockchain. And then how I ended up at Espresso was a while ago. Espresso was actually making a slightly different product called configurable asset privacy. And I saw this and I thought it was a really neat product. So I reached out and wanted to work with them. And yeah, the rest is history.
Great. Perfect. So today we're going to be talking about what is sequencing in the context of rollups. Ellie, could you share with us what's the current state of rollup sequencing? What does it look like right now? And why is it a problem? And why is Espresso trying to solve this problem?
So there's kind of two main issues with sequencing today. So right now, rollups use centralized sequencers. And this means that it's one party who does all of the sequencing. And by sequencing, I mean, it's the party that decides the order of transactions within a rollup block. So right now, that's only one party. It's centralized, and this leaves that party open to potentially censoring transactions, maybe charging really high fees for transactions, or also just going down and having liveness issues. So that's one aspect. The other issue is that these sequencers are for only one rollup at a time. So it's very difficult to do transactions across rollups and to get like an atomic transaction across rollups where you're guaranteed that both sides of the transaction will execute. That's very difficult to do today. And often what happens is that you have to wait a long time for these transactions and they may fail, and it's a pretty poor user experience. So that's the state of sequencing today. So what Espresso is doing is we are building a marketplace for shared sequencing, which I can explain more, and then also a finality gadget. So these two aspects of our product, basically they solve these issues, right? So they allow shared sequencing among multiple rollups at the same time, which gives really good user experience. They also allow decentralized sequencing, so you don't have a single party doing all of the sequencing. And then finally, they allow fast finality. So you can get these really good pre-confirmations that your transaction is included, but without having to wait all the way until it settles to Ethereum. So that's kind of a good summary of the state of sequencing today and what Espresso is trying to do.
Great. And you mentioned that Espresso was focused on another problem before. Could you share a bit with us, like when you guys decided to pivot your strategy?
So this was before my time joining Espresso. A while ago. Espresso was working on something called configurable asset privacy, which was a kind of a way to have privacy, but still allow maybe like certain people to have certain viewing rights into an asset. And then from there, though, the question inevitably arose, well, like how are these assets going to be fungible with other assets like regular ETH or USDC? And then this kind of led Espresso to the shared sequencing problem, which is, well, if you want to have these assets be fungible and you want to be able to move these assets around in like a useful way, you need to have some sort of a shared sequencer. So then from that, Espresso kind of pivoted to becoming this marketplace for shared sequencing and solving this new problem.
Sweet. It's very interesting. And, maybe if you can go a little bit deeper into this sequencing marketplace, because one of the things that that we see a little bit is that maybe it would be like larger rollups, not naming any names, may want to manage the sequencer, like the centralized sequencing themselves, right? So what exactly is this shared the sequencing marketplace, and then what does Espresso do differently, and how does it incentivize potentially folks to actually opt into this marketplace?
Yeah, that's a really, really, really great question. So I'll begin by explaining what the marketplace is. So the marketplace is an auction essentially. And basically each rollup can decide to auction off their sequencing rights on a, per slot basis. So a slot is just like some set of time. And in this auction, people can bid, and the highest winner will be the one who earns the sequencing rights. And so what's neat about this marketplace and Espresso's design is a couple of things. So one, the revenue from this auction is actually returned to rollups. And so this is one of the really important things that, say a rollup, it's like, for example, it's very good for a user to have this, shared sequencing mechanism, and this is great, but why would a rollup want to join, some sort of a shared sequencer? Because a lot of revenue can come from the sequencing layer. But in the marketplace, rollups actually, they get their revenue back from the auction. So they're essentially, if a rollup opts to use the Espresso marketplace, they're always going to be better off or just as good off as if they did just sequencing by themselves. So that's like a really strong guarantee that we can give. The second thing that, a marketplace like Espresso can offer is that you can, like I said, you can opt in on a per slot basis. So this means that you can do a couple of interesting economic things. So a shared sequencer is really great at allowing like atomic interoperability. But maybe a rollup says like, hey, I actually don't need that every single slot. So you can opt in to have like a shared sequencer for only some of your slots, because that's maybe what the economics incentivize. Like you don't need it for every single slot. I'd say also, thirdly, a really important thing that Espresso's marketplace can provide is like credible neutrality. So this is something that if a large rollup, or really any rollup, wanted to create their own sort of sequencing marketplace or shared sequencer, it's very difficult to have credible neutrality. So the classic example is like if you take OP and Arbitrums, two very large rollups, if one of them made a shared sequencer, the other one really isn't going to want to participate in that. So something like Espresso offers credible neutrality, which is very important. So yeah, I'd say that's maybe a good summary of the marketplace in general. And then a couple of other caveats about the marketplace is that so I guess to explain a little bit more about how the marketplace works. So rollups auction off, their slots on a per slot basis. And the people who bid on the slots are actually bidding on some sort of a combination of all of the rollups. So this is where it gets a little more complex, but you don't necessarily just have one party sequencing for all of the rollups all at once. You let the market decide. So for example, there might be a couple of rollups that are very valuable to be sequenced together very often. And the market will say, hey, people in the market will bid for that, and those rollups will get sequenced together incredibly often. You may have other rollups that, like I alluded to earlier, that don't need to be sequenced with other rollups quite as often, and maybe it's not as valuable to do so. And so this auction mechanism kind of takes care of allocating the sequencing rights to those who value them the most, including those who value the shared sequencing rights the most. And so essentially what it boils down to is that, this auction mechanism in the marketplace that Espresso has is all about giving the sequencing rights to those that value them the most, and then returning the revenue from those sequencing rights back to the rollups themselves.
Super interesting. And in all of that context, one question arises that when you decided to build this shared sequencing service, basically, did you always have the plan to be an AVS on EigenLayer? How did you learn about this restaking primitive, and when did you decide to integrate with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Espresso, we certainly kind of decided to do this marketplace for shared sequencing before, EigenLayer. I think we were aware of EigenLayer, but, we had decided to do it kind of separately. But then EigenLayer came up, and it seemed like a really, really good fit. So Espresso has two parts. It has the marketplace and the finality gadget. The EigenLayer is really important, especially for our finality gadget. It plays a role in the marketplace aspect as well. But a big goal of our finality gadget is that eventually it can reach the economic security and it can scale to the size of like the Ethereum network. Essentially, what we would like in the future is that a pre-confirmation from the hotshot finality gadget, which is what we call our Espresso finality gadget, is basically as good as a, finality guarantee from Ethereum. And so that's where EigenLayer seems to fit in really, really nicely, because EigenLayer is all about reusing Ethereum's economic security. And our goal is to scale to Ethereum's economic security. And in fact, we actually do want the same people who run Ethereum nodes to run Espresso nodes. There's a lot of benefits to that, which I can go deeper into. I'd love to go deeper into that. But yeah, in summary, Espresso, we want to be able to scale to Ethereum's level of security and their level of nodes, and EigenLayer is a really great way to do that. Espresso initially didn't start off with planning on integrating with EigenLayer, but it was just like a very natural, partnership.
Great. So you talked a bit about what EigenLayer's role is going to play in the hotshot finality service. You said it will still play a role in the sequencing marketplace.
Yeah. So it can. So this is where the sequencing marketplace can enable what's called based sequencing, which is where you allow Ethereum proposers to actually sequence for a rollup. There's some other, maybe nuances to based sequencing, but that's essentially the definition, is like an Ethereum proposer gets to sequence for a rollup. So what our marketplace and EigenLayer can enable is that someone who's restaked on EigenLayer can be restaked in Espresso's marketplace, and they can also be a proposer in Ethereum. And what you can do is you can actually sequence transactions for the next Ethereum block and the next rollup block at the exact same time. And you can offer atomic execution guarantees between Ethereum and rollups, which is like very difficult to do today. So this is like a really, really wonderful feature. So this is how, someone who's restaking on EigenLayer could get, even additional benefit and kind of get the benefits of base sequencing, as well as the benefits of just the regular marketplace and the regular shared sequencer.
Sweet. Let's go a little bit deeper into the economic security aspect of things, right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of like the big thing with EigenLayer, right? What are your requirements? Espresso's requirements in terms of economic security, and maybe even a follow-up question to that on your views on shared security versus attributed security.
Yeah. Like I said, our goal is eventually we would reach something very close to economic security of Ethereum itself. Obviously, that's not where we're going to start out. But starting out, we would like to have, and we do plan to have, quite a bit of economic security, because that's, a finality gadget is only, as strong as the economic security behind it. And so we want our finality gadget to be rather strong. So we don't have any, I would say, specific numbers I can say for the economic security we're aiming for quite yet, although I'm sure we'll be releasing information about that very soon. But I can comment on the shared security versus attributable security. Obviously, I think everything can change, and some of this is just my own personal opinion, but I think that we will very likely launch with just attributable security, due to the nature that economic security is very, very important to our protocol, and we need to be very sure that, I guess I could give an example. If you have shared security and maybe something goes wrong, you have some sort of slashing condition, etc., you can have a temporary time in the market where maybe your perceived economic security is not the same as your actual economic security. So to start off with, I think Espresso would choose the attributable economic security, so we can be sure that the stake is securing our system always matches the perceived stake always matches the actual stake securing the system. Again, maybe this changes in the future as AVSs become more mature and we kind of see how the market plays out. But in my personal opinion, we'll start probably with attributable security.
Sweet. Yeah. And kind of a follow-up on that, because it's kind of all kind of ties together in terms of security, right? You talked about your hotshot finality gadget, right? This is, EigenLayer introduced dual quorum as part of
right.
protocol, right? So is this going to be a version of dual quorum being implemented via Espresso with you have the ETH restaking plus also some kind of quorum for Espresso?
Yes. So As of now, no, we're not planning on doing the dual quorum. We are planning on just doing ETH restaking. So just restake ETH. You know, yeah, that's the plan for now.
Sweet. Thanks so much.
Great. And so could you, just taking a step back, like, could you give us a bit of a timeline? Like, could you share a bit your roadmap on when you're planning to launch these services? So yeah, you mentioned the hotshot finality gadget as an AVS, and also the Espresso sequencing marketplace.
Yeah. So right now, so by the time that this comes out, we will have launched our latest testnet called Cappuccino. We're getting very close to a real launch. We're hoping for sometime this summer, we will have a version launched that is real and live, is no longer a testnet. It will not be integrated yet with EigenLayer. That will come very soon after. But yeah, so sometime this summer, we'll have a real version of Espresso without EigenLayer that's live that people can use for both a simple marketplace and then also for the finality gadget part. And then after that will come EigenLayer integration. And then after that, we'll become, we're just expanding the features of the marketplace, expanding the features of the finality gadget, etc. So, but summary is this summer.
Nice. And do you have any rollups that are waiting for you guys to launch, to use your service? Do you have like a roadmap of like rollup integrations that you're planning to have them support the both of your services?
Yes, so we do have definitely have some lined up. We haven't publicly announced them yet, but we will very soon. So you can keep an eye on our Twitter and on our website for that. But we're very focused mostly on the Arbitrum ecosystem. We have a really good relationship with Off-Chain Labs, and we've done a lot of work on the Arbitrum Nitro stack to make that productionalized within our system. So that's our main focus. But we also have done work with the OP stack and the Polygon stack as well. On some of our previous testnets, we've had those rollups using those deployed. So a key part is that Espresso is very flexible. You can use any type of rollup with it. But I'd say for our roadmap, yeah, right now we're focusing on Arbitrum stacks, but we're certainly not limited to that. And if there's any project out there that wants to work with us, like, we're more than happy regardless of the stack that you're using.
Sweet. Awesome. I'm excited to see what's upcoming. So let's go into, the fun stuff for some people and not so fun stuff for some people, some other people. It's about, incentives, right? Because like the whole thing about, EigenLayer and even like, it's a marketplace for shared security, all that fun stuff, right? And you're a marketplace yourself as an Espresso, right? But like the thing is, right, can we discuss a little bit on the what the incentives for operators and restakers to provide, like, the economic security that you might be looking for, as well as like, kind of like, what like the expected, like, reward structure might look like. Obviously, keeping in mind the fact that, like, payments are not live on EigenLayer just yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I can talk about it at a high level. So the kind of the structure or the incentives to participate in the Espresso ecosystem as like an AVS operator or node operator are very similar, maybe to like the incentives to participate in the Ethereum ecosystem. So, presumably through the Espresso finality gadget, there would be some sort of sequencing fees that would get paid. Node operators would receive some sort of compensation for the service of sequencing all of these transactions. I'll also note that Espresso also provides a data availability service as well as with its sequencer. So AVS operators would also be compensated for providing this data availability somehow. We haven't released really the details on that yet, although we will soon. But yeah, I would say the structure is similar to that of Ethereum. And then when it comes to being like, for example, participating in the marketplace itself, like why would someone want to bid in the marketplace to sequence for rollups? This is similar to why someone might want to become like a builder in the Ethereum ecosystem, or why someone might, value being a proposer in the Ethereum ecosystem. So, for example, if people are familiar with the execution tickets design for Ethereum, This marketplace is quite similar to that. There's a couple of key differences, but it's similar. And so the incentives are very similar to why someone might buy an execution ticket in Ethereum is kind of why they would want to, participate in the Espresso marketplace. So, yeah, I would say overall, in summary, the incentives are just they're similar to the incentives that someone would have like participating in Ethereum itself.
Great, super interesting. And do you have basically like could you share maybe like the amount that not the amount but the size basically of the rollups that the Espresso sequencer could potentially host? Like could we see a future where basically like there are 1,000 rollups that are using the Espresso sequencer?
Yeah, I think that we could. So a lot of our design is really focused on scaling. So from the design perspective, there really isn't any reason that we couldn't scale. So we really focus on getting very good throughput, getting very good latency, etc. So yes, I think that you could. I think the only it's just whether or not the market values that or not. But Espresso as a protocol, like the marketplace and both the finality gadget, can certainly support many rollups.
Interesting. And maybe a bit of a random question, but with regards to the scaling of a decentralized sequencer like yours, sequencer marketplace, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like you could see network effects?
Yeah.
Do you what do you think, for example, like then the bigger Espresso gets, the market might also value like some alternatives or competitors?
I see. Yes. I do think that there's very good network effects, because I think that so whenever you want to get like these great atomic transactions, you need the same party to sequence. And an Espresso helps coordinate that the same party sequences. And I think in the future, it might be very useful to have, many rollups be sequenced together. Like you might not need to do that all the time, but you could imagine cases where you have a lot of big rollups and you have a long tail of very small rollups. And these small rollups are it's very valuable for them to be sequenced with these large rollups, because that provides really good user experience, because these small rollups that maybe don't have very good liquidity, or maybe, etc., can now borrow the liquidity of these larger rollups. So to answer your question, yes, I think that could be like large network effects. And I actually think that, the more rollups that want to use a marketplace such as Espresso, the better it actually gets for everybody, because you can get interoperability between all of those rollups very quickly. And, you can also, because Espresso supports base sequencing as well, you can also get interoperability between all of these rollups and the L1. So I think it becomes more powerful the more people that join.
Awesome. Super interesting. Thanks so much for explaining. One thing, another thing to talk about specifically is on the operator side of things, right? So operator, so is Coinbase, right? And the thing is, right, like there could be a material cost to potentially running, the Espresso AVS, right? So right. I think the question here is like, how heavy will it be, like, in terms of like the requirement to be able to run it, and then also like as Espresso gets larger, for example, right, like, how does the integration look like, the continuous integration look like? It's like, in the beginning, let's say you have like 4 rollups and whatnot, how heavy would that look? Eventually, if there's like 1,000 rollups on Espresso, right, like, how does that look?
Yeah, that's a good question. I really like the first question, because this is something that I've been working on the engineering side. Is actually, running our nodes and things like that. So I would say that there are kind of 2 classes of nodes within Espresso, similar to execution tickets in Ethereum. You're going to have your proposing nodes, those that participate in the marketplace and bid, and then you're going to have your validating nodes. So the proposing nodes might need to be a little bit beefier, because for example, they'll probably need to do some sort of building like a builder does in Ethereum. And they also may need to do a little bit of expensive, well, I don't want to say expensive, but slightly expensive cryptography computation for our DA protocol. However, the validators, just that that are not proposing, however, can be run on very, very minimal hardware. They absolutely can be run on Raspberry Pis. We have absolutely done that. They can probably be run. I mean, sometimes when you run our internal testnets, we run them on like 1/4 of a CPU and they're fine. So the validators themselves can be very, very lightweight, which I think is really great. And it also matches the ethos of Ethereum of like home stakers and things like that. So I'd say in summary, there's two classes of nodes. The validators are very, very lightweight. The proposers themselves might need to be a little bit beefier, but I think that makes sense. And it's kind of in line with the same idea as execution tickets in Ethereum. And then your second question, like what is the integration and what does this look like? So I'd say there's two fronts. So right now, Espresso is doing some integration work on our side to make sure that, some major stacks like Arbitrum Nitro stack works really well with our system. That work definitely doesn't have to be done by Espresso. So technically anybody could deploy on top of Espresso. And we've actually seen a couple of projects do that they just went on their own and they deployed a rollup on our testnet without any, help from us. So it's totally possible. And so if you actually don't need to do Espresso itself does not need to know about which, it doesn't need to know whatsoever about what the rollup is on it. So any rollup can integrate. What it looks like when you have 4 rollups versus 1,000 rollups from the perspective of Espresso, it's very similar. Really, what Espresso sees is just blobs of data. They just see blobs of data that they sequence in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't really care about how it interprets that data. And so that data is not interpreted until after it's finalized on our finality gadget. Then the data goes through what we call this derivation pipeline. The derivation pipeline is something that each rollup would run itself, and it's basically what takes the output of Espresso's finality gadget and interprets it and executes it, and then, proves it if needed and puts it on the L1. So back to your question, I don't think it really looks much different if you have 4 rollups or 1,000 rollups. Espresso actually really doesn't know the difference between that. It just knows that there's data on the network, and anybody can permissionlessly deploy on Espresso. Obviously, we're doing our best to help people deploy with major stacks, but it's certainly not necessary.
Amazing. And talking a bit more about the operator landscape, will you guys have what will your active set requirements look like? And do you plan on being completely permissionless on the future, or do you want to stay lean, especially the first few years?
So we are probably, we're not going to be able to start with all of the Ethereum operators to start off with. We will probably start with a smaller but still sizable set. This will be announced sometime soon once we finalize it. We will probably make it more permissionless over time, although we do definitely have a goal to make it permissionless within a reasonable time frame. It's hard because I don't want to commit us to anything because I'm doing the engineering work, and then I don't want to say, oh yeah, we're going to have this feature by then, and then on the engineering side it doesn't happen. But so I would say we'll probably
all the answer to this. It's soon TM. Come on now.
TM barring engineering work. But we'll probably launch with a more permissioned set. Maybe not 100% permission, but something that's maybe a little bit more lean, but still sizable. Probably something that you'd have seen other projects launch with. And then we'll make it more permissionless as time goes on. Because the goal is we definitely want it to be permissionless, just like Ethereum.
Sweet. Let's round some things up with just talking about the EigenLayer ecosystem in general, right?
Yeah.
So what is the kind of long-term vision that you see in terms of the EigenLayer ecosystem, in terms of what's being built, and what do you expect kind of AVSs to be built in the future, but also knowing the fact that there are competitors starting to peep out right now to EigenLayer, right? So would like to get your your thoughts on that.
I'll just caveat that these are my personal thoughts, not Espresso's thoughts. But so to the first question, I think that we'll see a lot of really great things with EigenLayer. I've already seen, a lot of cool things. Personally, I think the idea of watchtower applications are kind of really neat. From the sequencing standpoint, though, I think pre-confirmations are really, really important. So I don't know if you guys have been following the whole pre-confirmation it's kind of related to base sequencing, but essentially Espresso natively offers what we call a tester pre-confirmations, which means that it's a pre-confirmation, but it's backed by like a lot of nodes and a lot of economic security. So you can very likely treat it as final. And then you have something called proposer pre-confirmations, which is just backed by like a single Ethereum proposer or a single Espresso proposer. But EigenLayer can you don't have to have EigenLayer to implement this, but EigenLayer certainly helps. And I think that these pre-confirmations are going to offer like really good improvements to user experiences. So I think that that's a really neat thing from the sequencing standpoint. And then as far as remind me the second part of your question.
Yeah, I was just talking about like, now that, there might be some competitors now that are popping up for EigenLayer. What do you think of in terms of that? Like, is there going to be a multiple, like, is this like a winner take most or winner take all? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. I think that generally speaking, competition is really good. And so I think that having some sort of competitor is good. Will it be a winner takes all? I'm not really sure. I think as long as protocols can be very aware of where their stake is restaked and if it's restaked on multiple restaking protocols or not, and they can account for that risk, I think that it's fine. I think that that's just like a problem we'll have to solve. If you have EigenLayer and like an EigenLayer competitor and someone is, restaked on both, are they allowed to be restaked on both? Or like, if they're restaked on both, and one of them slashes, how do you make sure that that slashing is reflected on the other one? So I think that that's a difficult problem. But I think if you solve that problem and you can be very aware of the risk that your and what your stake is being collateralizing, then I think it's not too bad to have competitors. And I think in general competition is good. And I don't know. I think that it could play out. We could either see one win or maybe we could see a couple of like large restaking platforms. To be honest, I'm really not sure.
Perfect. That's great, Ellie. I think we still have a couple more minutes. Any last messages you want to share with our audience?
Yeah, I would love to. Absolutely. So I guess our message is that, we'd love to work with any sort of project, whether you're a rollup or you're building on an application on top of a rollup, even if it's not on one of the major stacks, we would still really love to work with you. You can feel free to reach out to myself or our Espresso Twitter account. You can DM them, or you can also reach out to Verity Coltman, who's our like ecosystem lead, and we'd be more than happy to talk to you. And then finally, we're building this marketplace for shared sequencing, and the key point is that rollups are allowed to opt into it at their will, and rollups get revenue back from the auction. So it's a really great place for it allows decentralized sequencing, shared sequencing. It can help with a lot of the issues that we see today with centralized sequencers. And so it's a really cool idea, and we think it's like kind of the future of how rollups interoperate with not only each other but also with Ethereum itself. So, but yeah, we would love anybody's feedback and comments and anything at all. We'd be more than happy to talk to anybody.
Super cool. Ben, I don't know about you, but I'm really, really excited to see how all of this play out. I think that rollup sequencing, decentralized sequencing is something that's super, super important if we want to see like a bright modular future. Ellie, thank you so much for being with us today. To the audience, we'll see you on the next one. But yeah, thank you so much, guys, for participating.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was wonderful.
Great. Bye, everyone.